Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to this conversation. We're talking today about edge computing, and this is part of a report by SenzaFili in collaboration with FierceWireless. And today I'm talking to Caroline Chen. She's an Intel, and she's the Vice President and General Manager of the 5G Infrastructure Division. Caroline, thanks for being with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure talking to you, and this is a great opportunity to catch up and see what happened over the last year, and well, maybe even more. But what is new about edge computing? At Intel, you've been working on this for a long time. What's happening? What are the latest?
Yeah, I certainly feel I've been working on edge compute for a long time. I mean, you've been with us through the whole journey. So when we started, like, remember we were always doing PowerPoint and a lot of POP. Actually, we started seeing real deployment now. We used to be having to convince people. There's always a question about, do I want edge compute? Now the question is more about, hey, how do I get edge compute out faster, and what are the ecosystem partners I can partner with, the deployment strategy. It's really going from talking to doing. Someone just sent me a recent Dallas Cowboy draft AR VR video on YouTube that was done by AT&T in conjunction with Dallas Cowboy, using edge compute and VR for the fans to be able to watch a 360 what's happening in the headquarters as Jerry Jones was going through a draft. It would just pop in and someone just sent it to me, hey, you gotta look at this on YouTube. They talk about Mac, they talk about edge compute, how does that enable that? So it's really gone from a conceptual idea to something that people are working on and rolling out, trialing. So it's really becoming, now you need to go into the implementation phase.
So it's more so people are willing to open their wallets, basically, to just start deployments, and is that what you're seeing?
We definitely start seeing that. We actually tracking, the real is always the sales. So we're tracking the sales. We see the healthy funnel that people are working on. We're seeing requests coming from the field asking for help, mostly around helping design in with our customers. So that's a real signal to us that this thing is really started to take off. We're still at the early stage. We haven't nowhere hit that hockey stick, but we're definitely seeing a varieties of use cases now that are coming in that we used to just talk about, but we see some really good sign that market is picking up.
In terms of geography, what are the hot regions?
Well, so interesting. In the U.S., we see a lot of around sports, because sports is this country is pretty sports crazy. We see retail entertainment. In China, we're seeing a lot of industrial, because the government putting a lot of focusing on uplifting the industrial. At one report I saw that there's like 1 million networks, enterprise private networks to be deployed, because the government's really stating that part of the plan 2025 is to innovate and help the state-owned entities coming into modernization. So what they call Industry 4.0. In Europe, same thing. We're seeing a lot of transportation and industrial related. Sports is always there, by the way. I recently attended a Brooklyn 5G summit where someone from Bosch talked extensively about how Mac and 5G can help the company really modernize. I think you were there too, and it was a very interesting discussion. So wide variety, but if I will summarize, there's a lot of industrial automation, entertainment, sports. We see retail. So these are the ones that really started popping up as early stage of implementation.
Yeah, and we're going to talk more about use cases later, but before we get there, can you tell us about, at the beginning, it was at CMAC, it was the only game in town, and now there's many more initiatives. What do you see that happening? What is it they bring to the edge computing platform?
It's both a good thing and there's also a little bit disconcerting, right? Because you don't want too much fragmentation. So we really, inside Intel, we talk a lot among ourselves how to defrag some of these, how to unify. But I think this is very normal at the early, at this stage when things start coming out. So you see a lot of verticals, like for example, we're involved in 5G AA, very much related to automotive. We involve in autonomous edge compute consortium, AECC. We just recently joined the, I think it's called 5G AIC. I might have butchered the name, but it's around industry automation. So SC really was the one that gets started, really focusing on extracting the underlying API from the comm side all the way to the cloud side. Recently, we announced joining Acrano as one of the founding members in an attempt to unite all of the defrag and put it into an open source community. So it's going through its growth spurts, but ideally we would like to see the industry coalescing around a few in like consortiums really drive a uniformed API. I think that's just critical.
Mm-hmm. Right, and so yeah, you need to avoid fragmentation. Now, another dimension that is interesting is that we talk a lot about the cloud, and
right.
So centralized model, but then edge it brings us in the other direction. It's so we used to say that we centralize if you can, but it distribute only if you must. So, but now it seems like we're going the other direction. Is it just a swing back and forth, or is it two models that are coexisting?
I think the distribution of the cloud is here to stay. Yeah, you're right. I remember having that discussion with you and with a couple of analysts. People would say, well, why don't you centralize? Because yeah, if you centralize, you do get a higher efficiency and lower cost. That's default. But with all of these latency workloads, latency sensitive workloads that's coming in with cars, in industrial, a lot of hybrid approach. So there are centralization and there's also a push to the distributed cloud at the edge. It's a must. I mean, it really, because there's a demand, people are meeting it. In fact, we're talking with a lot of the public cloud folks too. And there are, if you've seen some of the announcement coming out, like we involved with Crown Castle on some of the initiatives. We have also been talked to some of the colo data center, and their mission is to build edge data center. And they didn't do this because it's not a charity, right? There's obviously there are people paying them and becoming their tenant to build this kind of edge data center. So I think this is here to stay.
What does the edge data center look like? How is it different from a centralized, and where is it? Where is it physically located? How close to the edge, to the RAN edge?
Yeah, so like there's actually a really good picture. I think it came out of a blog from AT&T CTO that talked about how the network gets reimagined based on latency. So generally we were looking at, like, obviously at the device is at a true edge, and then somewhere at the RAN you're going to from 5 millisecond latency, 10 millisecond latency, 30 some, and then you go to the cloud, in the seconds range. So it really depends on the workload. So some of the edge data center obviously is not the big cloud data center. It's smaller, lower wattage, but in terms of their requirements, and it's still very very similar. So you still have that characteristics of the big cloud data center, but you are in a smaller form, and we see all range too. We see something called next generation central office, NGCO, that sits in the core, somewhere between the core and the RAN. We also see a lot of on-prem. Like Monica, we actually working on some on-prem the data center. People call it all kinds of like terms, and a lot of times people call it, just simply call it Mac, but it is on-prem. We're seeing a lot of that happening to address a very specific latency workload. So there's latency, there's also, don't forget, a lot of data sovereignty issue, right? A lot of data sovereignty, privacy issues. So really makes it such that you have to have something, storage of the analytics running on-prem. And then, so lastly is that it's amount of data just there. You have to be able to ingest the data. It's not realistic to port everything back to the cloud. And many times you don't even need to, because some of the data can be consumed locally. So all of these three major factors is driving this proliferation of edge data center, pushing part of the data all the way out to the edge. So we do see that the hybrid approach is taking shape much greater way than before.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it seems like there is a combination where there is use cases, so there is a reason to do it, there is a demand out there, there is a way to do it, like we have a technology to do it, but also we have other enabling sort of technologies, and virtualization is one of them, because it's difficult to imagine edge computing to really be deployed widely without virtualization, right? So how do they go hand in hand together?
Yeah, I think it's funny, when we started this, I really, the business that I'm managing really started with the idea that I started virtualizing the network. We started virtualization, Intel's been involved in a long time, and then we started at the core network, and then we start pushing that to the RAN. We call them virtualized RAN or cloud RAN. Mac really almost becomes a benefactor of that, right? Because the network is now virtualized as close to the lower level layer as possible, even at the 5 layer, but primarily at around layer 3, 2 started getting virtualized. So you are now seeing these core, the CPU core and the storage becoming available at the edge. So it's very natural for the industry to look at, well, okay, now I got these compute capability, and the Mac becomes a much easier sell, right? Because you do have the compute, you have the location, you have the information, because now you have the IP stream sitting right there. So the two really benefited from each other, almost like going hand in hand. So it's something that when analysts talk to me, they using the words missing the two world, but I could see why, because the two of them really, some of the deployment we're seeing today is like, now you have virtualized RAN, now you have Mac, and they just sits sometimes physically in the same chassis itself, or maybe just a separate blade that people just add on to run the compute workload.
Now, what about slicing, network slicing, automation, AI? There also seem to be, all happening at the same time, and it seems to make again a whole lot of sense, because they reinforce each other.
Yeah, they reinforce each other. Yeah, absolutely. Some of the inference needs to happen at the edge, and inference workload can run now on what we a container or a VM that's just made available. So it's like this little circle of goodness that just keep happening. Once you virtualize the network, you're allowing service application, you give the common API. Next thing you know, all these workloads that runs better on the edge start landing at that spot. AI, inference, machine learning. So you mentioned network slicing. In fact, you and I were both at the event when the gentleman from Bosch talked about slicing. To them, it's not just a vertical slice, it's actually more like a little square, because even within the same use cases, same application, they have different use cases. So you really started fine-tuning horizontally and vertically. You almost have to give them a little square or a little cube of resources with a spectrum, bandwidth, latency, say, here you go for this, for your particular. So it's so funny. It's almost like this trifecta that's happening. Everything starts with network virtualization. Once that get done and people start treating it like a CIO workload, and more things landing on it. You'll be surprised that, when you and I met, I was really talking with my traditional customer. Now I'm talking with people in a sports team, in a sports league, enterprises, and I'm traveling to places I never imagined I'll go to. And I have to my to my the way that I present to. I used to be really focusing on comms. The 3GPP this, 3GPP that. Now I have to like, well, okay, let's step back. What does that really mean to your business? So yeah, it's really becoming. I'm becoming a lot more IT aware and CIO focused as a result.
Yeah, and I imagine you talk much more, not just operators, it's a wider crowd. So the enterprise, even if it's a venue owner, industrial, whatever, they're much more involved. What does it mean in terms of the whole ecosystem and business model? How are they getting involved? How do you see them getting involved?
Yeah, so this is actually, honestly, this is probably the challenge now the industry have to solve. It's not just Intel. It literally takes an entire village to do that. So you may remember that Intel always had this thing called Network Builder. When we started NFV, we have this Network Builder. Last month, we just launched Network Edge Builder, specifically targeting a new crop of partners that we're seeing. We're talking with the tower companies. We're talking about innovators that develop vertical applications, bringing them and educating them about what 4G, 5G, Wi-Fi network can enable them. Talk about Mac, talk about NGCO with them. And the business model is not the traditional model, here's a SIM card either. There's a lot of discussion about how the money flows. Probably every conversation we've had, let's take example of a smart stadium. The question is, who owns the content? How does the content get distributed? Or when there's some money, how the money flows there. There's a lot of willingness to do rev share, because remember, this is still relatively new, so you wanted to incentivize people to deploy, but not too much upfront CapEx spent. So some of the ideas that we're working with Crown Castle and Vapor.io is to turn the CapEx into more of an OpEx formula, and that seems to be one that gaining traction. To be able to host, to be able to participate in a revenue share. So in other words, de-risk some of the early pioneers across the board. And that's also another path. Like what happens if it's a private network runs inside a factory? Who owns it? Where's the liability? Who maintains it? Who are the SI? The role of SI become even more important, because many times you really are not talking with the traditional telco guys. You're talking with somebody who's IT and CIO, who manages that, who maintain it. So what life cycle, right? This is you moving almost from that 5-year, 10-year upgrade cycle to what social media is like a couple of months. There's sometimes even weeks. So all of that orchestration becomes a bit more complex. But I think the industry is solving. I know within Intel we're investing significant amount of energy try to solve that issue.
So the issue of managing and having all the different parties contributing to it.
Yeah. We don't give people a bag of parts. You need to make it consumable. You need to give an integrated platform. We always talk about easy consumption and faster adoption. Ultimately, if the enterprise cannot find a way to consume it, then you're gonna have a problem in the supply side, right? So we tried since we sit on the base layer of the supply side, we try to make this more integrated and so easy to consume. That becomes a mantra. Whenever my team comes to me with this idea, how do you ensure this gets easily consumable by the end user? Think about the end user not just as a network operator who's really smart and knows how to do this, but think of them as a industry, as a factory owner, as a retail shop owner. How do they consume this piece of new technology you gave them? You must make it a much more integrated platform for them to deploy it.
And it's an interesting topic, because the users that consume it are different. So they could be individual subscribers, companies, staff. I mean, all sorts of. Now that brings up the issue of the business case, because clearly with Mac you do introduce new elements in the network, and so there is a cost associated, whether it's CapEx or OpEx.
Yeah.
How can we justify that? And what are the drivers there?
Yeah, well, so that's what, in fact, we always go back to why people even do MAC, right? You're going back to sometimes it's regulatory because of data sovereignty issue. That's one. And then the other thing is that operationally, does this solve some of the operational issues with the enterprise owners? And then you looked at, then is there any added monetization opportunity that you created for them? So once you get these three principles down, most of the time, either it's a go or no go. And I found most of the time, they will find ways to innovate. There are examples of which we gave them thinking that, oh, you're gonna solve problem 1, 2, 3. At the end, once they deploy it, they start putting more and more application, and they wind up solving a lot more issues that we initially start with. So in some cases, we will go back and do a ROI estimate with the enterprises. In some cases, we found the payoff is much faster than we thought. It's sometimes in one case in a retail shop was like 5 months to pay off the investment, and that's quite tremendous because it solves a lot of the operational issues. Think about just managing the inventories and so on, but you actually add on a lot of others. Like retail today is not just retail, right? It's more of experience. So no one just goes in there and just shops on the shelf. People compare prices, people look at reviews, go to social networking, look at recommendations. So it really becomes a multimedia shopping experience. You have to be able to equip the shop owners with all that tools. So giving them a connected cloud, sometimes I call it a cloud with connectivity, allows them to improve their enhance the shopper experience and many times lead to a higher return. So we found that, and then the sports, we actually recently did a Olympics, and so I was actually there at Pyeongchang, and I'm not really a sports fan, but I was fascinated by the experience you get. Even though it was cold, it was just sitting out there, but you're not watching somebody skiing downhill. You actually having this experience that's much more augmented by that. You know, there's so much more explanation coming in, and it really enhances the experience. There was a white paper, I think, we sent it to you ahead of time, was the what we did in Shanghai with the Mercedes Arena, with the Nokia and China Unicom and Tencent, to really combining a multi-angle viewing experience for people in the stadium, as well as folks back home who subscribe to the channel, the micro channel over social media. So that kind of brings in this whole idea that your user experience is much more enhanced. Now, what if you take that to a factory for the workers? What if you take that to a car shopping, a retail shop? So the idea is that once you have connectivity and you have ways to let application run effectively, efficiently, you do open up a whole channels, whole spectrum of experience as possible.
Yeah, and I think experience is the key term here, because it's not just the service, it's an experience. You actually see, it's like the mobile device is a lens to the world. It's not just telling you, what's the weather. It shows you, it sort of makes you feel like what the weather is like. Well, I guess not, but exactly. So it's really enriching in multiple ways. Now, in terms of who is funding this, do you see mobile operators? I mean, what do you hear? Is it mobile operators that want to go ahead, fund it, and control it, or is it the venue owners and the enterprise that want to also have more control over the edge computing infrastructure?
So at this time, we actually, I would say it's getting to more even, but when we started, it was really always the enterprise who wanted this. It's always enterprise making the buying decision. I need this, with the use cases, it's actually driven by the enterprise. We do see the network operators getting more and more involved and be part of the decision cycle, because of the technology that they can provide, and because there's a lot more form factors that they can deploy. in some cases, we just start seeing that right now is that some of the over-the-top guys really started engaging. So just going back to the example of that smart stadium, the first one we did was actually Wembley. That was just the stadium, the sports team, and the operator. At the time was EE, now part of BT. Then the second one we did was in F1 Formula race in China. It still remained into China Mobile, the vendor, Nokia, working with us. We work with them. The last one, the white paper that we published, Tencent, one of the major cloud providers in China, got involved. And that really become a tipping point. We are now seeing more and more folks in Olympics. We actually was part of the Alibaba Mac Pavilion. Inside the pavilion, they have a showcase called City Brain, showing with Mac, with cloud, what kind of experience you can get in a smart city environment. So they actually have a pavilion showcasing their cloud offering. At the same time, they show connectivity. So we see more and more of that over-the-top guys started coming in.
Mm-hmm. So what is that you guys at Intel are going to promote edge computing? I mean, you mentioned a lot of trials. Is that the main way you try to promote the growth?
Yeah, because we don't do the end system. So what we really do is establishing use cases. We also, I mentioned we're doing more integrated platforms. So we are trying to unite in the form factor, and the less form factor configuration you have, usually that decreases the complexity of a supply chain. Therefore, you get a better efficiency. So we are promoting something called BKC, a best known configuration. Obviously, we don't just dream about that in the vacuum. We talk to the end user, we talk to our customers, we talk to OEMs, and try to come up with that. We have a SDK, software development kit, that is free to download from Intel website, just one click through licensing agreement. We continue to enhance that. We started with SCMAT, then we became 3GPP compliant. Now we actually have different plugins for the cloud, for the public cloud. We have most of the public clouds already in. We now start working with some of the clouds providers in China. And we also gonna do some of the next wave cloud provider API as well. So we try to make it as agnostic as possible. So then it's a horizontal platform. It prevents the defragmentation, prevent the fragmentation, and then also actively participating in a consortium. Recently, I mentioned we joined Acrano in an attempt to unify. So if I boil down to it, make it easy to consume. So simplify the configuration in a hardware platform, providing SDK, work with our partners through the framework. We launched the Network Edge Builder, establish use cases, and work through the whole supply chain from our direct customers to network operators and to the cloud providers. And because Intel has a sports division, so we work with the league, we have gaming. We just did this extreme game in Australia. We were part of that, providing 5G and Mac to it. So we try to expand that across all the ingredients Intel has. AI, I mentioned, we have some learning, machine learning, deep learning framework. We try to bring all of that in, integrated, consumable, easily consumable is really the angle.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to do because you have to, so many things have to come into place.
Yeah.
So Caroline, it was great catching up with you and get this update, and look forward to the next one. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for watching and listening in to this conversation with Caroline Chen at Intel. And again, this was part of a report on edge computing by SenzaFili in collaboration with FierceWireless.